my little baguettes, welcome to l'Académie Équilibre, and today we're doing one of the most important grammar tenses, that is l'imparfait. So let's dive in then. So we're doing another grammar tense today, that is your l'imparfait or the imperfect tense. Now, first thing that we need to understand is what does l'imparfait mean and what timeline are we talking about. Okay, first things first, imparfait translates into imperfect in English. So it is the imperfect tense. Now, why are we calling it imperfect? That is not perfect. It's not perfect. What crime did this poor tense commit that we're calling it imperfect? So, imperfect is something that is not completed, right? Perfect is something, that's finished, that is done, that is your perfect. For example, if you do your homework, if you were given 5 questions and you submit all 5 answers, that you might get perfect as a remark. But if you do like 3 answers and that two are half done, half not done, they would say, oh, this work is not perfect. So something that is not fully done, as in incomplete. That is why we call it the imperfect tense. Now, what time are we talking about? So, we are talking about the past. So, l'imparfait is one of the past tenses. Now, passé composé is also a past tense, right? So, how do we differentiate that passé composé or imparfait? Which one are we supposed to use? That will come to later. First, we're going to understand what imparfait is on its own. When do we use it, how do we use it is what we need to understand first before we make any comparisons with any other tense. Alright, so obviously this tense is talking about the actions in the past, which is your le passé. Now, which actions are we talking about in the past? First thing is when you're talking about something that you used to do repeatedly in the past. So you would say, oh, back then I used to play football all the time. Every day I used to play football, or every day I used to go to school, right? So these are the sentences that's something that you did again and again in the past. So there we use imparfait. We call it habitual actions. Things we did repeatedly in the past, that is again and again, right? So there you would see sentences like I used to, right? I used to, maybe he used to, she used to, anyone. When we say used to, that means that is your habit of the past. Okay, so here imparfait would translate into I used to whatever you used to do. Okay, next we have when we describe things. Describe things as in maybe we're talking about yesterday. Okay, oh, so the weather was really beautiful, right? It was raining and it was early in the morning. Or maybe when I was young I used to play with my friends, right? So when I was young, you're describing something, right? Or maybe you want to say I liked gardening when I was young, right? So you're describing something. Okay, maybe you're describing the weather, you're describing the time, the location, or something you used to do. Okay, so there also we use l'imparfait. What are we describing? Location. For example, I said it was raining or it was sunny, for example. We're describing the time. Maybe let's say when we're talking about time, I would say something like it was in winters when it was snowing. So that is again, I'm describing the weather, I'm describing the time, I'm describing a season. There also I will use imparfait. Another one is maybe you're describing someone's physical appearance. That is the way someone looks, used to look. For example, my brother used to be really smart. And also we have age. I'll give you an example. So if I talk about physical appearance, right, I would say she used to wear glasses, right? Or if I talk about age, when I was 10 years old, when I was young, all right? So sentences like that, again, we're talking about the past, but something that was happening in the past, we use imparfait. Those are descriptive sentences, right? And then we come to the final thing, that is continuous actions in the past, right? That is past continuous. We also have that in English. So, for example, I was reading the book, right? I was going to school. Now, these are incomplete sentences that something was happening in the past while something else also happened, right? So, here two actions will be happening. First is that one action occurred, one action is already finished, that is action 1 done in the past. Action 2 happening in the past, that is the imperfect tense, l'imparfait. I'll give you an example. I was reading my book when the bell rang. I was teaching when the class ended. Okay, so here both actions are in the past, right? But one was happening and the other got interrupted. Okay, so that is your past continuous. The second action will be your imparfait. So your second action will be your imparfait. Now this was your usage of imparfait. How we use it in the past tense, what does the name mean, and the usage. Alright, now finally what we've understood the entire premise of it. Now we'll come to how do we form it in French, because all the examples I gave you were in English. Finally, we come to la formation. That is your how do we form the imperfect tense in French. The good news for you is that we only use one verb here. Like in passé composé, we have two verbs. So you have to conjugate the first one, then you have to do the second one. So you have a lot to deal with. But in imparfait, people think it's very complicated, right? But imparfait is actually really, really simple if you pay a little bit of attention. Okay, first thing is that we're only going to be using one verb, which makes our job extremely easy. If you understand how to conjugate this one verb and where to use this sentence, you're done. That's extremely simple. You're done with your work. Okay, so now how do we conjugate it? Simple structure, that is the subject, person who will do the action. Second will be your verb, that will be done in imparfait. It can be any verb, any action that was happening in the past. Maybe the describing the weather, as I said, or somebody's physical appearance, time, age, location, or a habit that you had in the past. I used to do this, I used to do that. Or maybe an action that was happening, that is a continuous action, incomplete action, when another action happened in the past. Then you have your object, objet, or the rest of the sentence. Okay, our main priority is to understand how do I conjugate this verb. We already learned where to use this verb. Now how do we do it? So we have a few steps that you need to understand, and once you follow them, you'll get your result. First step is to take the verb. It can be any verb, right? Manger, parler, choisir, finir, that is eat, choose, finish, right? Second thing is that we're going to conjugate it with nu. This is extremely important. You're going to conjugate it with nu. That means it will obviously end with ons, right? Whenever we conjugate a verb with nu, it ends with ons in the present tense. This is extremely important. What are we doing? We're taking any verb, obviously in its infinitive form. That means it's not conjugated. We're going to conjugate it with nu in the present tense. Now, with our result, what we're going to do is that we're going to remove the ons. Fine, that much is pretty easy. Now we come to an important step of how to make this into imparfait. Alright, what we're going to do is, now that we've removed the ons, we're going to add our imparfait endings. This will be new for you because imparfait endings are something that we've not studied before. Now, what are these imparfait endings? These you will have to memorize. So with je, if your subject was je in the sentence, you will add AIS. That means you cut off the ONS and instead you add AIS. With tu, you add AIS, same thing. With il, you add AIT. With nu, you add IONS. With vu, IEZ. And with il, pluriel, you will add AIENT. These are your what we call imparfait endings. Now these are extremely important. I would recommend you pause the video and take a screenshot of it because this will be used almost everywhere. Alright, now that we've understood the steps, what we need to do is that we'll apply it to a verb. For example, I want to say I was eating my dinner. Now obviously I was eating, that means past continuous, right? That is an incomplete action in the past. Imperfect, that is a crime. That means we're going to do it with imparfait. Now what is the first step? you take the verb, that is manger here in this case. It is obviously not conjugated. What are we going to do? We're going to conjugate it. First step, conjugate it with nous. So it becomes nous mangions. Remember that it's a GER verb, which means it's an exception. With nous, we add an extra E. Alright? So it becomes nous mangions. Okay? Then, what does the next step say? It tells me to cut off this ONS. Alright? I will cut off the ONS. And what am I left with? I'm left with mange. Again, remember this nous is not of any use to us. It was only for conjugating it and what we get as a result. That was with the help of nous. Nous was only helping us. Now it has no use. We remove it. Okay? We're left with mange. Now, what is my subject? I want to say I was eating the dinner. So, je dash le dîner. Now I will conjugate mange according to je. So what is the imparfait ending? It is AIS. So I get je mangeais le dîner. Okay, I was eating the dinner. Now let's try a few more examples so it's crystal clear to you what exactly it is that we're doing in imparfait. So let's take the verb lire, that is to read. So I want to say I was reading. Okay, now that is your imparfait. So how will I conjugate it? First step is to conjugate it with nous. So it becomes nous lisons. Now I'm going to cut off the ONS and I'm left with lise. Alright, now what I'm going to do is, let's say we're conjugating it with il, that is he was reading. This is my sentence. He was reading. So my subject is il. With il, we add AIT. So it becomes il lisait, for example, le roman. That is, he was reading the book. Now there are a few verbs that might seem a little confusing, so we're going to deal with that now. One we've already done, that is manger. So manger is your GER verb. Okay, it comes under the ER verb category. It is a GER verb. So we know with GER verbs, we add an extra E with the nous when they're conjugated. In case you weren't aware, just note it down once. Okay, so when we're doing it, if you noticed, my verb came out to be mangions. Nous mangions, right? Same way, there are other verbs that are, for example, CER verbs like commencer. So when we conjugate it with nous in the present tense, we get nous commençons. You have this at the bottom of the C. So it becomes nous commençons. Now it is your job to tell me in the comment section what do we call this little thing under the C. Fine. Now what matters is that when we convert it into imparfait, it becomes nous commencions. That is if I want to say we were starting. Okay. There I will not take this to the conjugation. Fine. Another verb for that is when we're conjugating manger, right? So when I conjugated with je, the E was there. But let's say I wanted to say we were eating the dinner. So nous mangions le dîner. I took the manger, I made it into mangions. Then I cut off the ONS, I get mange. Then this E is not supposed to be there. Okay, when you conjugate it with nous in imparfait, you will remove this extra E. We don't add the E because there will be way too many vowels otherwise. Okay, so that's why we leave it as mangions. So we cancel off the E, but only and only when you're doing it with nous in imparfait. Otherwise, this E will stay. I'll give you an example. If we have the verb manger, so je mangeais, tu mangeais, il or elle mangeait, nous mangions. With vous also, I will remove the E. So manger. Then with il, elle, pluriel, that is they. So we remove it with only and only nous and vous. We remove the extra E. We do this with all the GER verbs. Okay, that is one thing that you need to pay attention to. It's a minor detail that might cost you your marks. Okay. Then next we have Verbs like étudier. That is, what are we doing right now? We are studying. So to study is étudier. Now, how do we conjugate in imparfait? First step, we'll conjugate it with nous in present tense. That is, nous étudions. Fine. Then we'll make it into imparfait. That is, we cut off the ons. We're left with étudie. Now we're gonna conjugate it with all the subjects. Je, tu, il, elle, nous, vous, and il, elle, l'uriel. Now here it becomes je étudiais, tu étudiais, then il, elle étudiait. Now here is the thing, right? You already have an I at the end. There also you're supposed to add an I with nous. So here what you need to see, so even though it looks a bit wrong or a bit odd, right? Maybe a little confusing, there will be two I's here. Yes, we do have two I's. So it is conjugated as nous étudions with two I's together. Same way with vous also, étudier with two I's. Then finally, so what you need to focus on is that in verbs like étudier, two I's will be there. It might look weird, it might look strange, but that's just how it is. Alright? Now, what about exceptions, right? We have exceptions in every single tense. We have exceptions in passé composé. We have exceptions in imperative. We have exceptions in future proche, future simple, right? We have exceptions almost everywhere. So what about imparfait? Now here also you have exceptions, but you have it easy. Why? Because there's only one single exception in imparfait. One single verb, that is être. Only être is conjugated differently. How is that? So according to what we've learned so far, how should it be? We do it with nous, we write nous sommes, right? But then how do we cut off the ons? There is no ons in the conjugation, right? And it's a little difficult to structure it. We won't go into all of that. What is important is that we don't do it this way, okay? There is a separate conjugation for être in l'imparfait that you need to memorize. It's extremely and extremely important. So maybe you should note it down somewhere. So it is j'étais, tu étais, il, elle était, nous étions, vous étiez, and finally il, elle était. So j'étais, tu étais, il, elle était, nous étions, vous étiez, and il, elle était. Fine. This is an extremely important conjugation which you need to memorize, and this is where we end our imparfait tense. Now this is only the basics of how you do imparfait, but obviously in exams, especially for 10th graders, you will have imparfait as a mixed exercise, right? That means all other tenses will be there along with imparfait. So I'll be making a video on the difference between passé composé and imparfait. So in case you have a confusion there, please stay tuned for that. I hope you understood what we learned so far. In case you have any doubts, feel free to comment down below. Thank you.